Hi, I'm Tina Oldnow, Curator of Modern Glass at the Corning Museum of Glass. On November 2nd, 2007, we opened the exhibition Masters of Studio Glass, Joel Philip Myers and Stephen I. Weinberg. This exhibition is the first in a series highlighting influential contemporary artists whose work is well represented in the museum's collection. Joel and Steve joined us at the museum at the exhibition opening for a lecture and a discussion. What follows is a special video cast of that event, which is part of the museum's ongoing series of Meet the Artist podcasts.
Little did I know when I was a ceramics student at Alfred University in 1960 that I would be standing here in front of you and talking about a 44-year career in glass. I began as a graphic designer. I went to Parsons School of Design in New York and worked as a package designer in New York City for 2.5 years. And that would put me about 1957. And at that time, I became interested in ceramics because I was very much influenced by the Scandinavian movement, which I saw throughout New York City. And I was greatly influenced by that and made a decision. Here's something I designed. So I decided that I wanted to go abroad and live in a country, a Scandinavian country, because I felt about Scandinavian design. And so I sailed over on a freighter in 1957 with the idea of living in a foreign country, Denmark, and to study ceramics at a Danish school for ceramics. And so here I am sailing over in July of 1957. And I can tell you, Denmark was such a wonderful country at that time in terms of its quaintness. It was trolleys and everything. I was just glad I was there at the time. It's still a very beautiful city. I designed a spice set that was made there. And I married a Danish woman there who has so influenced my life that I couldn't possibly spend more than forever talking about it. But this is us on our honeymoon in Venice. And of course, the connection with Denmark has been and will always be an important connection in love. We came back to the United States in 1960, 59 actually, made some money to go to Alfred University, where my wife was also a student. And I'm just briefly showing you some of the pots that I had made. And then when I was spoken to by the chairman of the art department at Alfred University, Ted Randall, asked me if I wanted to be designer for a glass factory in West Virginia. And of course, I had no idea that I wanted to do it. I was studying to be a ceramic teacher. So I went down to the factory and I was blown away by the drama and the wonderful, and they made glass completely by hand. So that was I knew then that if this was a place to be able to learn to blow glass by hand. And so I signed on. But I signed on, of course, only as a designer. I mean, that's all they wanted. And that's, so the previous designers have both been graduates of Alfred. I was the first one that went there with the idea of learning how to do it myself, and that was because, of course, of Harvey Littleton. What I saw that what his idea was about. These are images, of course, that you're familiar with, but I always like to look at this slide because I had color in my hair then. And I would try to find whatever time I could to work on the floor while they were working as well. And these are some of my designs. And actually, 2 of my designs are in the exhibit, which I was nice to see them there. These were all in production. And then, while I was at Blenko, I taught at Penland. This is 1965. And this is the great studio at Penland. This is as you see, the Toledo Glass National. And you have to realize that what brought interest to glass was through the efforts of museums and a few galleries. And this was very important that Toledo Museum sponsored these exhibitions, competitions, actually. And the person in that picture was Marvin Lepofsky. But I was interested in doing something with glass after I was finished. And I was interested in painting. So I used lusters to paint on glass, which could be fired on, and which I could do in my own quiet space, not in the humdrum, the din of a factory, which you all know about. The first factory that Marvin worked in was at Blanco. I had a workshop at the California College of Arts and Crafts in 1968, and I can tell you it was the most unbelievable experience for me, living in West Virginia so isolated. This was the 60s, and we were completely isolated from it. It was great. And if anybody knows these people, I can tell you quickly. There's Steve Maslach, Dick Marquis, John Lewis. This is an exhibition at Toledo. And this is one of the Zarkov pieces that you have seen one example of here. And I did a series of those in the early 70s. Pieces that I made, individual pieces I made at night and then eventually glued together. And these are ceramic decals that I also was playing with. The reason for it was to give some scale to glass, because whenever you saw a glass exhibition, you could just go about that high. So this is Illinois State University in Normal. This is our chicken farm. And these are pieces inspired by the garden that we grew in Normal. Workshops. These are events that had a great influence on spreading the interest of glass. This is a conference in Zurich, Switzerland. Paul Bartro on the left. These are so full of people that are still active in glass. That began years ago. Sam Herman, Marvin Lepofsky. These are pieces I made in the early 70s, focused on the hand because I lost a finger in the factory on a machine. These are pieces I was making at that time, trying to really paint with glass. In 1977, I had a sabbatical in Austria, where I did a body of work that was influenced by the vineyards surrounding Baden. And this is one of the pieces. I also worked at the Castro-Palmagor glass factory, where I exploited the use of clear glass. 1978, the conference in Kyoto, World Crafts Concert. These are now the Emperor and Empress of Japan, watching a demonstration, the first demonstration in glass, and responsible, I believe, for the fantastic growth of glass in Japan. These are pieces that I made subsequently in the late 79, 80, and 81. Poterie, France, the first workshop in France ever in 1982, which led to fantastic growth in a museum in Poterie itself. This is our home in Denmark. It was our home in Denmark that we were forced, more or less, had to sell last year because of just too difficult. But this has been the inspiration for a lot of work. The Danish countryside, the Danish color, flowers of my own garden, because I'm a gardener. In 85, the first international conference in Czechoslovakia, making work there. My two Japanese students and their studio on the island of Nijima. You see that studio down there on the left? That's a fantastic designed architectural building. And it's off the coast on a small island south of Tokyo. And they have this facility. A wonderful place that I've been several times. Aha. My great love is fishing. This is my two Swedish friends up on the top of the mountains between Norway and Sweden. We flew there on a helicopter. That was the days I could do that sort of thing. I just wanted to show you what it's like to live to be on top of that part of the world. And it has influenced my work. That's called Arctic Summer. Aha, another great experience. These are big pieces. And in the 90s, 1990, before the revolution, or whatever it was, I was in Russia doing a workshop. So, I mean, this thing has spread fantastically. This is the body of work I call the Dialogue Series, which was done about 1997, 98. And another very important, probably the most important sculptural piece in a way, is a piece called The Dogs Go On With Their Doggy Life While the Torturous Horse Scratches Its Innocent Behind on a Tree, which is a line from a W.H. Auden poem called the Musée de Beaux-Arts. I don't have time to talk about that either. These are some of the pieces. This is the interior of those pieces, cut open. And this is a piece called The Ghosts of War. And I don't have to say more than that. This is taken in Leicester, Scotland, where I taught a few years ago with Paul Stankard. A wonderful place, another new workshop in a way, and these are a few of the latest pieces that I have made. And I can tell you that the way that I work is that these are deliberately geometric, because who sees geometry, that kind of geometry in glass, in that sense? So, thank you very much.
Hello. First, I want to thank the museum, and in particular, Tina, for those kind words. It's nice to hear them. I, too, started my career working with glass, coming from a ceramics background. As an undergraduate at Alfred University. A mutual friend of Joel's and myself, William Carlson, I heard him lecture, and I'm not allowed to listen to him lecture, and he's not allowed to listen to me because we blackmailed each other and said, "You really said that?" But I did hear him describe my work as I organize space, and I couldn't agree with him more. I came to glass after folks like Joel, Dale Chihuly, group, Henry Hallam, really broke ground and said, you know, there's something really here. And I was fortunate to be part of a time where I did not have to go into academia. Markets were starting to grow, the collectability of the material. So by the time I finished graduate school, I set out on my own. I have 4 sons, and I'm asked, am I pushing them to do what I do? And the answer is, if they start making glass, I'm going to dress them up in dresses and parade them through town, because it's not an easy way to make a living. This is a sister piece of one of the pieces in the exhibition here. The piece that is here is from the exhibition Glass 1979, or it soon turned into New Glass. But Glass 79 was an outtake from the previous show of Glass 59, which was, if you look back, just a great reference of where a lot of things started. You know, it didn't really all start in 1964. There were artists and folks working in glass and really making some very strong statements. I did have to buck the tide of kind of loosey-goosey, anything goes, abstract expressionist concerns of the material, what the material can do by flinging it and twisting it. The odd part about this is when you look at my work, one of the first things you'll see is the absolute control of the material that I have, which is one of those great jokes in life, because my life is completely chaotic and out of control. And it's this duality. And even walking into my studio, it's not even controlled chaos, it's just chaos. This is pretty much a chronology of the work that I did or have done. I try to pick out what I consider some of the most successful pieces of each of those series. I tend to make objects to fulfill a certain need at a given time. And as an artist, you don't have a business plan, because if you did, as soon as I become successful at what I do, then it's time to stop doing it, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But as soon as I know that I'm going to have a high rate of success, then I start getting bored, and it's time to move on. Pieces talking about architecture, balance, grace. I also like to consider myself a pioneer in a different sense of pushing a material that, the best way to get me to do something is to tell me that I can't. I'm pretty obstinate, and a lot of this work came out of balancing what I need to do for visual form to achieve the certain image I had, but also just to push myself that one step further that I thought something would really go. And I look back at the work, and I still get excited by it. I unfortunately, until my wife, about 10 years ago, just broke into the studio and said, that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one are going home in boxes. You're never showing them to anybody. I didn't own any of my own work. It wasn't about even the finished, it was about the finished product, but it was also about the process. I began working with more massive forms. This is really the first of a series just called the Cubes. There are two of them upstairs. Something that I really like is, for a while, people described this as the definitive series of work that I had done. And the work has changed many times since then, and no one says that any longer. Now, either they've forgotten that I made these pieces, or they're looking at what I'm doing today. I'm still not clear. One of the people, well, two people that I thank in my career. One of them is Bill Carlson, dear friend, my dearest friend. Because we just never stop talking about this stuff. And the other is Eric Hilton, because when I was an undergraduate student, he gave me license not to do what everyone else was doing, and really encouraged me. I was at the right place at the right time. These pieces were made by machining the negative forms out of a plaster-based mold. Now, I'm a kid from Brooklyn, and what do I know from a milling machine? And I saw a milling machine and a used machines. We had the jewelry industry in Rhode Island. And I didn't know what it did, but I know I had to have one. We now run about 6 of them at the studio. And once again, ideas for me generally start as very simple concept, and they become more complicated. And I lean towards the complicated. One of the problems of working with this material is as I get older, I haven't figured out a way to make lead crystal lighter. And, it was tough enough when these were 85, 90 pounds. When I was 30, 35, I'm working on a series that you'll see in a minute of mandalas, inspired from my travels to China. And they're much larger and much more difficult. I love the engineers over at Schott Mainz, where I bought a lot of the glass. They were great fun. They'd go, we spent so much energy taking all those bubbles out of glass. What the heck are you doing? And this, when my formula, it got complicated, and this is just about the end. Started doing some other work, just never clicked. I mean, I've had some really dry periods working where I didn't know what the next piece and then something else would happen. This was part of the 2 series that look the same, that are not, that happen at the same time. One were still lifes, and this is one of those, just comparing perfection, man's perfection to nature's perfection. But others, were more natural. This also was a still life. But then stories started coming. I had some hard times during the years that these pieces were made, including the death of my father. And lots of people would ask questions about what was going on in my life, and they were hard to answer, so I answered. I became a storyteller, and a lot of people don't even know about this. They just see kind of pretty objects, but each one of them has a very clear story in my head. These are about fallen angels and living really hard. And I remember the person who bought it, and they called me up and they said, "It's the prettiest thing I've ever seen." And I went, "Oh my gosh. Well, I better not tell them what any of the symbolism is." I've lived on the water most of my life. The next group of work were the boats and the buoys. The buoy forms were actually found objects that I translated into cast crystal, and then colored them using techniques, something called spray metallizing, actually liquefying metal and spraying them and adhering them to the glass, and then using patinas. I love the idea that you could take a man-made object, a piece of foam, and the fisherman, and like the 39 that's how I found it. There's just all that folk art that's in each piece, and this is just my translation of, and putting it on its pedestal. Very different from anything I had done before. And it's curious how I relate to my own work and how I remember it. And there certainly is no relationship between what you make and you love and what sells in a gallery. I try to take that formula that I did with the buoys, and going back to my ceramic history, and I loved old ceramic jugs. This thing probably weighed about 150 pounds. I only did 2 or 3 of them. And these are the boats. Probably the next group of work that kind of defined, in some people's eyes, my career. And these came to a halt about 3 years ago. And once again, it may look like a lot of chaos in there, but it's just, there's an enormous amount of control. I love pushing the envelope in terms of technique and making machines and the glass do maybe not necessarily what it thought it was going to do. I wish this was more true to the color. This was very much the same saffron color that Christo used in his gates in New York City. And I came across the material in Germany. The factory owed me some money because I didn't deliver on some other glass. And the salesman said, how about taking these 2 pieces of yellow glass? And when I got them back to the States, an optical manufacturer saw them and said, you know, they're worth probably close to like $400,000. And they just had to get them off their books. The company they made them for went out of business, and they had been sitting on them. So I made 7 pieces. And I'm lucky to say Sir Elton John owns one of them. And kind of this brings me to where I'm working today. The mandala, the circle. But there are square mandalas too. Much more painterly in terms of how I'm dealing with surfaces. Really have been excited by this body of work. I also love studying the female anatomy, and we did a series of work that's ongoing. It's been put to rest for a short time now, and it's a group of life studies. So these are life-size pieces taken from models. My favorite model is my wife, who is my backbone, wearing a Linda McNeil piece. And you know, we own a design business together, things that, and no, I did not design the diamond, but the nape we made. I've had the great fortune of working with some incredible people over the years. A piece we did for Swarovski for the Millennium Toasting Flute. I almost had a absolute Weinberg ad that fell apart. And just kind of process stuff. My wife is a great draftsperson. It's World War III when we design something together, and we do it often. Do never be in the same room with us because there are flying objects. This was for Brown University, Boldly Brown. Their mission was to raise $1 billion in a year, and they did it. And just kind of variations on a theme. We do the Elton John AIDS Foundation Award every year. And, you know, we're asked to do a lot of things pro bono, but we've had a great life and it's worth doing. And pretty much that's my guys, and I think I took my 15 minutes, so thank you.
What I thought I would do is ask Joel and Steve a few questions, and we can talk about them a little bit, and then we're going to open up questions to the audience. But I had a couple of things that I wanted to ask both of you that you really didn't address in your talks, and always interests me as an art historian. And who are some of your favorite historic glass designers or even artists working in other media, painting and sculpture?
I thought about that question. And first of all, there are too many. There are too many artists that have influenced me, not directly in any way, but they have influenced me by their creativity. When I go to a museum, I'm always so re-inspired to be a creative person because of what they have done. And we're not talking about everyone. We're talking about a very select group of people over the years in history. I'm very much interested in people from the early part of the 20th century as painters and draftsmen and so forth, and even earlier on. So the people that appeal to me as artists come from all fields: designers, painters, architects, sculptors, and some glass people. And I think that their body of work that they've left behind, when I see them, when I came to jury the new glass 2 years ago, my favorite works were that I had to select were pieces from the collection that I hadn't seen in a long time. That sort of, wow! I just said, wow! I wish I could have made that piece. And it's nothing. Creativity is such a wonderful gift to give the world, and there are such wonderful artists that have done that. And so that's how I'd like to look at that idea. I would say that in the field of glass, it's interesting. I have never found young students of glass to be interested in history at all. And I know that people will probably contradict that, but nevertheless, that's my impression. And I would go to Sweden, and I would ask some of the Swedish students if they ever knew Erik Hurdland. Now, Erik Hurdland was the one that liberated Swedish glass, and he put the bubbles back in the glass. And he was an inspiration to me as an artist when I was in Denmark in 1957. His work was all over. And I just looked at that work and I said, that's wonderful. Because this guy was a young guy that was really turning everything upside down in terms of what the vision of image of Swedish glass was. And so that's my answer to your question.
Thank you. How about you, Steve?
I like the idea of an artist working with the confines of the studio with an eye for personal expression, yet he was a factory also. And Lalique, Gallet, Frederick Carter, they were great artists. So I find inspiration in the glass world, but as far as artists, it's you go into museums on a regular basis and you're looking all the time, and we're bombarded with images, and it's hard not to, there's not a name that I can pick and say. You disagree with Joel in the sense about students in history. I think it's more so today that the students today know less of what has happened in the last 25 years.
Knows less?
Knows less, but when I was a student, I knew every piece you were making.
Yeah, but in the beginning, there were only that many people.
Well, it made my job easy. If you use glass 7 new glass as a pretty good reference, where the beginning maturity of the contemporary glass movement starting about then, as a random, we all knew what everyone was making. I have no idea exactly, and as a curator, I imagine the undaunting job of filtering through so much caca to get to the good stuff. This is a full-time job.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
It's a full-time job.
2 full-time jobs.
2 full-time jobs. That's interesting that you talked about Glass 1979, because I was talking to someone, I said, in 1979, I could literally sit here and tell you every single person working in glass, and that was not hard. And by 1989, I could not do that. It would be impossible. And I think partly there's been this huge growth because of programs like yours that you started, Normal, because of people being influenced by this pioneer 2 generations of the late 60s and 70s. And so that's a really fabulous success story, where more museums, you were talking about the importance of the Toledo Glass Nationals, those in the late 60s, those shows really were an important validation of the movement, as was Glass 1979. Thank you, Tom Buechner. Also, thank you to Tom, for Glass 1959. These things really helped to bring glass to the fore, and this incredible success story, and the fact that we have no idea who's making anything anymore because it's so big, is really part of that.
Back to what Joel said, I think a lot of the young contemporary glassmakers today, I mean, I'm still pretty young and I'm pretty ancient in their eyes, and it's like they have no idea what I've done for 30 years. And once again, go back 30 years, and we all knew everyone who was working.
Well, which kind of brings me to another question. I think it's the last one I'm going to ask you, because I want to open it up to the floor. But what would you say is the biggest difference between, we're talking about kind of working with glass in the 70s and working with glass today.
That's easy to answer that question. Just look at Lino. What happened with Lino
Talia Pietro
is an example of how Italy was brought here instead of in 1969 when Dick Marquis went to Venice to learn what they were doing there. Lino brought Venice here. And in, I don't know how many years it's been, 10 years, he's brought Venetian glass to the point where I can't say they're making better than the Venetians, but we know Venetian glass through those people that have studied in Pilchuck, everywhere. And so what you see, well, for me it's a little different because I didn't have any mentors. I started completely by myself in the glass factory I could go on, in working complete isolation. And when I would see it,
And you freed it up for people like myself. Right. You kind of paved the way to allow, I guess, my generation of
but
artists.
I didn't see that, it's just funny when you're just doing things. I can't say that in that sense, was a visionary in the way I suppose that Harvey Littleton was. But I was just happy to meet anyone that was doing glass. And frankly, and so everything was different. A student today, I don't think a wise student will not go to graduate school. They'll go to Pilchuck. They'll go to Northlands in Scotland. They'll go to Saw School in Saw Pottery. They'll go to Turkey. They'll go to Haystack. They'll go everywhere to learn something from a master. And then they think they've got the answers. This, it's a matter of technique. Maybe if they're smart, intelligent, and perceptive, they'll learn more. But that's what the world is like. I often think, my God, these people don't know what they have, because nobody really thinks that way. When you have it, they don't say, I'm grateful because I have this. It's here, and I'm using it, and that's the way it is. But I didn't have a school. I had to go to a local West Virginia blacksmith to make a pair of jacks. We didn't have the tools. Today, you open up a resource catalog of Glass Art magazine, of Glass Art Society resource book. It's that thick, and it's an industry that's grown. What's also happened is that who has replaced the American decorative glass? All those factories that went out of West Virginia, that went out of business in West Virginia, for Astoria, not Fenton yet, but a lot of other factories. The studio glass people, they are the new American glass industry as such, that kind of industry. And they do marvelous work. So, I mean, it's just fantastic to imagine, to see, and as you said, I look through books and I see names and I see work that extraordinary, and there's a lot of good work that nobody ever sees, because how do you see it all? How do you see the
But there's
work?
also a lot of bad work that everyone sees.
It's usually that way.
Just because more people are working, and going back to that historic context, they're learning technique, and I personally think my worst employees that I've employed at my studio are art students, because they come with all the answers because they bought them in a package, and in 4 years they know. The best guys, we used to joke, there used to be a bumper sticker. The glass workers were the truck drivers of the art world. They'd come in, admit they know nothing, and would start, ground level and work up. The apprentice system that's been around since the beginning of time made sense. You learned hands-on. You weren't given as a gift. It wasn't an entitlement. And frankly, except like you say, you go learn a skill, a craft, you go work with lino and you can make a certain twist. It doesn't make it deeper work. It doesn't make it better work. And when enough people know how to do that, then, oh, he worked with lino. So I'm not sure if the depth of the work has gotten any better.
I think we have some wonderful young people making work. We should talk more about the work in the sense that a lot of good work doesn't get seen because galleries don't exhibit it. Mm-hmm. There's a whole issue about...
You saw some great work in New Glass Review going through there.
Yeah, and none of it is exhibited because of the marketplace. And what you're also seeing is a very interesting kind of parallel with what's happened in clay, is that now you can't make a functional object. Literally, but you know what I mean. You can't really make one because it's not sculpture. And there are a lot of bad sculptors that should be making good pots.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And the same thing in glass. But anyway.
It's good point. I'd like to open up some questions to the audience for a few minutes. If anybody has questions for Steve or Jewel. Yes? Okay, the question was, the person who was asking the question would like to hear about more the switch from pottery to glass that each artist made.
First? For me, it was real simple. Ceramics took a lot of time. All of a sudden, you're standing in front of a hot furnace. You're looking into hellfire. Every sensation I've got 2 cataracts already from looking in those furnaces. It's all consuming, and I just got bit by the bug. But what's funny is I ended up working with glass in a way that's more exciting to watch corn grow than to see me make a piece. Because every step takes that long. You don't come and see me do a demo because it's...
Yeah. Well, for me...
Your demos are great.
Body casting demos are good.
I took on glass as thinking of myself as a creative person that could do anything. Now, when I think back to now, that to have that attitude at that time in my life, I would never have believed that was true of me. But I simply saw another material with creative potential. Now, I was trained as a designer, and so I had a background in that sense, and I'd been to Denmark, I've been a little bit around, and I thought, well, I know I can design glass, I'm sure of that, I'll learn about it, I'll study it, I'll be there. I was at the factory, lived in town, so I began to understand what I could do. And believe me, working in a factory, it depends upon what factory you're working in. That makes a big difference, because working in Blanco was like working with, like this, because of expenses and everything. In any event, there was a lot of possibilities and a lot of things that I discovered in the first few years that I worked that I could never have made. But let me get back to the answer, was that I thought back over the years about working with clay again in a way that I could combine it with glass in some way. But I didn't have the time. I couldn't teach and run a graduate program and be able to do my own work, which was very, very important to me, and do whatever else I had to do at the university, to be able to make it work. And I always regret that. And also the other thing is that my body began to break down. And my hands began particularly to break down. And I could think of myself in my shoulders. I could hardly wedge a clay anymore. But I would have, you know, it's funny. I think about clay people, and I think about glass people, and very often I think of them in the way of the material. Glass people are sort of hard. I'm not being general. I'm being general.
Oh, softly.
And clay people are soft. I kind of see. There are things about the studio movement that at this point in time, I think we need a better body of literature. That's what I think. We need a better. Maybe it's a question of more time. Maybe we need more time to have a better body of literature. And I say that because I compare it with the body of literature in ceramics. It's like this. I mean, it's enormous. I can see more of that, but I don't think I ever will. I think it's a question of difference between people that are sort of action and other people that are more introspective and then therefore are able to write.
I think different than you. If I went back and made clay objects, I would work with the purity of the clay and forget about mixing it with glass or having anything to do even with the vocabulary that I've developed as an artist working primarily with glass. I would go back and use the material as I believe what I do with glass and take the best aspects of it and what I can bring to what's in front of me and resolve whatever issues I bring to that lump of clay in front of me.
Yeah, did we answer your question?
Can we take another question? Yes. Isn't there an enormous difference between clay and glass in the sense that with glass you work with light and with clay that's not really as, you know.
Well, if you've seen my work out there, the white pieces and the black pieces. When I started to develop that body of work, which by the way, I should also point to you that these bodies of work weren't done in a year or two. They were long-range things that took a long time to reach a point of, of development or an end. When I made those pieces, I was really criticized because it doesn't look like glass. But who's to say what glass looks like? You know, we know it, of course, as traditionally in the sense as clear crystal glass. But we know now it is certainly not that. It doesn't have to be that, but it could be that.
To discount the relationship between light and glass would be asinine. But I think also, as Joel says, you can make glass that's not dependent on preconceptions of what it does with light. And frankly, through my career, The things that were more glass-like were more financially successful than if you deny those qualities, within the piece. So I think there are certain expectations of the viewing audience of what glass is supposed to be.
I think one of the things that makes certainly my job interesting and the museum so interesting as a place to visit is the fact that glass can assume so many different forms. That it can be opaque or translucent or transparent or reflective. There's so many different things it can be. It's so versatile that it's really a wonderful thing to just see the range of expression that you can have with it. Thank you very much, Joel and Steve. This has been really a pleasure to be able to talk to you, and I hope everyone gives them a big round of applause. This has been a Meet the Artist videocast by the Corning Museum of Glass, Corning, New York, the world's largest museum devoted to the art, history, and science of glass. The exhibition, Masters of Studio Glass, Joel Philip Myers and Stephen I. Weinberg, will be on view in Corning through October 19th, 2008. The next artist to be represented in the series is František Wiesner, which opens in November 2008. For more information on these and other exhibitions, please visit the museum's website at www.cmog.org.